Well, good evening, everybody. We might as well get underway. Thanks for coming out again this evening. We've been having beautiful weather, and it's winding down towards the end of the year. So thanks for coming out. I know it's harder and harder for people to do it. But why don't we begin with a little prayer? In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of this day. We ask you always to be with us, to be in our minds, to be in our hearts. And may we come to know your love in all that we do, so that we may reflect that same love you have for us in a world that is in dire need of your love. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, this is the third of the theological virtues, love, we're beginning with, or ending with, rather. I went the opposite of Pope Benedict. He started with love, but most of the time we end with love when we talk about the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. But this is a quote from Deus Caritas Est, which was Pope Benedict's first encyclical, and it was very good. It was a very good encyclical, and what I enjoyed about it was very short compared to the ones that John Paul II wrote, which could be very lengthy, and then Pope Francis just put out his new apostolic exhortation, which is quite lengthy as well. I still have yet to make it through it all the way and read it all, but that's what I like about this one. It's pretty concise, but it's short. But here's a quote from it. We have come to believe in God's love. That's a quote from Scripture. In these words, the Christian can express the fundamental decision of their life. We have come to believe in God's love. That's the ultimate reality of our life as Christians, is the love of God. And that's why he begins there. This was the declaration, if you will, of his papacy, that God, in fact, is love. Deus Caritas Est. So, when we talk about love, we can say it in many ways, right? I love my job, my car, my kids, my wife, my family, my country, my friends, my food, hobbies, pets, etc. And we can think about it in different ways, right? Love is an attraction. Love is a desire. Love is a motive. We talk about falling in love. Think of all the different ways in which we speak of love. And we obviously mean it differently. Hopefully we do. Hopefully we don't love our pets as much as we love our wife or our family, right? That would hopefully be the case. I don't know for sure, but hopefully that would be the case, right? So we use the word love in all sorts of different ways. But what do we, particularly as Christians, as Catholics, what do we believe about love, specifically as a theological virtue? And we'll get to that in a second. But first, let's look at natural love. And in his encyclical, Pope Benedict in Deus Caritas Est, he talks about there's three ways of speaking of love on a more natural level, in which the Greeks classically spoke about love. The first way is eros, or romantic love. Now, I'll get to how we've kind of hijacked this term, but essentially it's not a bad word. It's actually a good way of loving. It's a good way of loving. It's a search for happiness that transcends self, essentially. So eros is a search for true happiness, but we realize that true happiness can't just be found here, right? We have to go above and beyond just our mere self. We have to give ourselves. In some ways, love has to be a gift. That's really what it's all about. And particularly, what's true about eros is that it's a love of our whole self, body and soul, together. So that when we love, we don't just love in our soul or mentally, right? Or we don't just love with our body. We love both. We love with both. That's who we are. And throughout all of history, we, as as humans, have misconstrued how the human is formed and how the human is, right? And we're a composite, the way of saying it. We're a composite of soul and body. We're both. That's why I've come up against a number of people, actually priests, who have said, it's bothered me a little bit, well, heaven is just a mental state or a mental reality. I say, no, it isn't. Recite the Apostles' Creed for me, please. Because we say, and we've been doing it all Easter at Sunday Mass here, we believe in the resurrection of the body. There's got to be something bodily, physical about it, because we're humans. We're body and soul. Another thing that people say, and metaphorically speaking, is that we become angels, right, in heaven. We become angels. Well, we don't actually become angels, because that's not who we are, right? We're not, and we use it in a nice term, right? And it helps us, but kind of talk about it and understand it, especially for little kids. But we are who we are. We'll be this person, well, not exactly, all the kids want to know, well, what body will I have? Will I be a little kid? Will I be full grown? And ultimately, we don't know. There's the tradition, if you will, that it'll be us in our prime. So it'll be when we're the strongest, the healthiest, the most fit. But we'll be humans. We'll be humans. So there's still some hope, right? We'll be humans in heaven. Because we're bodily and spiritual beings. So Eros, the search for happiness, but in our body and soul, together united. Not just one or the next. Someone like Plato talks about how we are primarily our souls. And the idea of our life is to get rid of all bodily, if you will, attachments, which Catholics would say that's true, but the Catholics also admit to a great joy in having a body, right? We eat, we drink, we have fun, right? Those are all good things. But we're not just our soul, whereas, and we'll get into this a little bit, well, even modern day, we kind of still have that same idea. We have a misappropriated sense of what the body is and how it functions in our life. So, moving on. Philia, friendship, love of friendship. So, when we have a friend, right, we come to love them. And this is actually a great type of love. I won't be talking about it too much at all. Philia is, think of having a friend, right? And we can have different, gradations of friendship, right? We can have really good friends, and we can have those people we're just acquaintances with. But philia, love of friendship. Agape, that's God's love for us. God's love which is transcending and comes down to us. Love now becomes a concern and care for the other, as others. So in some ways, Eros is a search for happiness, for our own personal happiness. But when we come to agape, it becomes a concern and care for the other as the other. Not just because it brings me to happiness, it brings me to fulfillment, it brings me to completion, but I love them as they are, for who they are. So that's agape, and that's in many ways God's love for us. Loving us for who we are, because of who we are, regardless of what we do. And in many ways, you can't have one without the other. Ultimately, Eros, in its true sense, brings us to agape. And agape allows us to truly understand Eros. Love, ultimately, on a purely natural standpoint, is a choice to will the good of the other for their own sake. I love one of the things when I do wedding prep, and if I've mentioned this, I'm sorry, but I love to ask couples when they I meet with them the first time, I kind of get to know them, talk with them a little bit, how did you meet, all that kind of stuff. And then I do what we call the pre-nuptial questionnaire, which asks the questions about validity. And then I ask them, I say, well, why did the two of you decide to get married? And they'll sit there and they'll say, oh, because, she's my best friend, or he completes me, and it's like all nice and happy. It's like, okay. Ultimately, it's a read my mind question, I understand. But I'm looking for them simply to say that they love one another. That's all I want. And it takes them a while to come to it. Sometimes it takes, some people say it right away, others it takes a while because they're thinking too much. I said the most basic reason why you decided to get married, because you love one another. And then I ask them, well, what is love? What is love? Because again, we talk about love in all sorts of different ways. So what is love? And then they sit there and, they'll say different things. But for the most part, I'm looking for a specific set of things. But this is mostly what I'm looking for. It's a choice to will the good of the other for their own sake. So I will another person's good. That's what I choose, right? So it goes above and beyond mere feelings. It goes above and beyond mere desire. It goes above and beyond myself in many ways. So it's a choice. It's an act of what we say the will. So I will it. And this is particularly important in our culture. And because we don't have a robust sense of what love is, even on a natural level. So purely naturally, love is a choice to will the good of the other for their own sake. And in many ways, I actually couldn't find a good example, but in a movie or something like that. But think of a lot of romantic movies and novels. In some ways they convey that. They also can misconstrue it as well. And by the way, if you ever have any questions, please just interrupt me. So just quickly, going now to the theological virtue part of the description. So what is a theological virtue, right? Theological virtue is faith, hope, and charity, or love. Charity is a specific way of saying God's love for us. So it would be like the Christian way of maybe, in many ways saying, it's the Christian way of saying agape. So faith, hope, and charity. Through these, faith, hope, and charity, he has bestowed on us the precious and very great promises, so that through them you may come to share in the divine nature after escaping from the corruption that is in the world because of evil desire. So there are three essential aspects to theological virtue. Their object is God. So faith, hope, and love, when we speak of faith, hope, and love, we're speaking of them with regard to how they lead us to God, how they bring us to God. Not just natural hope, not just natural faith. I hope that I can get something to eat after this, right? That's my hope. I probably will, but they're infused in us by God alone through baptism. They're given to us through baptism. These virtues are not made known to us save by divine revelation. So they're given to us in the sacred scriptures. They're given to us in the Bible. We have come to know that through divine revelation. There's no way we naturally, if you will, came to that. They were given to us and shown to us by God. Okay, so that being said, now how does this apply to charity? Pretty simply, actually. Charity is a theological virtue by which we love God above all things for his own sake, and our neighbor as ourselves for the love of God. So even the love of neighbor is because of the love of God. Now, we can love our neighbor, and that can also lead us to love God, like in many ways Eros does, right? To love another person can lead us to God, as the famous line in Les Mis, yes, thank you, it says. To love another person is to see the face of God. So loving, Eros, can lead us to God, but charity in and of itself is given to us, infused in us at baptism, and it allows us to love God for God, to love God as God. So it's not simply just God loving us and showing his love. He's giving us a gift so that we can love him for his own sake. We can come to know his love. Right? That's what charity is, simply put. And that begs the question then, so why do we love God? Why do we go to church? Why are we Catholic? Right? It kind of leads to all of these questions. These why questions that a lot of people have that we may have ourselves. This is interesting. In the Code of Canon Law, so canon law, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the book that structures the church. So it's not the most fun reading. It is not something you would want to put by your bedside and read at night. You could if you wanted to. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is far more exciting compared, if you ever read that, it's far more exciting than the Code of Canon Law, comparatively. But this is the last canon. And yes, that's how you spell canon. It's not with two N's. That's how they spell it. So, in due regard for canonical equity and having before one's eyes the salvation of souls, which is always the supreme law of the church. Salvation is at stake. Salvation is here. We in the church, we have lost sight of that, I think. That faith, hope, and love ultimately lead to salvation. Now, charity enables us to love God kind of even outside of salvation. So we can be kind of we can kind of be the word's escaping me, but we can kind of be like, okay, I'm in this for salvation, which is good, and that leads us to charity. That leads us to realize to love God for his own sake. But if we don't look at salvation, which is the supreme law of the church, we can't ultimately find that true love. We ultimately can't love God for his own sake, because we would rather just abide here in this world and not worry about anything. So salvation, the promise of salvation, which is what Christ gives us, enables us to come to love truly him who loves us the most. And so we really need to recover that. That's why we're here. We're here to bring salvation to the world. Well, Christ has done it, and we have to continue that. Salvation is in fact at stake. We're not just here arbitrarily. There's a reason, there's a purpose. And this ultimately is the purpose. So we really need to recover that, I believe, in our church. We've gotten away from that. And one of the reasons is because we don't want to be, how can we say this? We don't want to be mean or unkind, or we don't want to push the faith necessarily on other people. It's not PC anymore to be a faith-filled person. Faith has become a private thing, right? We'll see that in a moment as well. So we need to remember eternal life. And here, there's often a critique in all of this. In that, ultimately, in our world, in that the church's commandments, so the commandment to salvation leads to a lot of other commandments, right? Of how we need to live our life, and this, that, and the next thing. And why do we need to do that? And the criticism is that it leads to bitterness. It destroys the greatest gift we have, which is love, right? The church even destroys love with all of her commandments, so that people can't properly love each other. They can't properly have fun, right? They can't be united with one another. The church kind of destroys that. And that's always in many ways, that's the underlying, at least for my generation and younger, that's very much often the criticism. That the church doesn't allow us to be who we are, doesn't allow us to love one another, and you hear this all the time. The reason for all of the wars in the world is because of religion. and which is just not true. I mean, there have been some wars that were religious wars, the Crusades, even some of them right now going on, not from our end. But certainly, yes, there have been wars fought with religious tags on them, right? And even those who are, claiming jihad now, the Muslims who are claiming jihad, there are other Muslim sects or who say no, this is not a religious war. This is a misuse, right? This is a misuse of our religion. So you have conflicting views there. But the point is, that's the great critique against religion. It causes wars. It causes division, and doesn't bring about love. And if the church would just go away with all of her commandments, we would all live hunky-dory. So, ultimately, when we talk about Christian charity, and here's where our world and us split big time. When we talk about the image of Christian charity, we talk about the cross. Right? There's our model for charity, or not even the cross, the crucifixion. Right? Some of our Protestant brethren don't like the crucifixion because they say, well, the Lord already died on the cross and he doesn't need to do it again. And we say, this is the salvific act which never ends until the end of the world. This continually happens in the sacrifice of the Mass, the non-bloody sacrifice where God has perpetuated his salvific act through the sacraments. So that's our model. Christ on the cross, God willing to die for us, to send his Son and so die so that we may live. So every image of every little bit of love that we talk about will have to in some way include sacrifice. True love has to include sacrifice or selflessness or gift, giving of oneself. Love is a gift, right? I have been given many gifts, and now I have to give back. Now I have to give in turn. So love will always constitute one of those things. So ultimately, when we come to love, true love is loving something or someone for their own sake. In particular, when we talk about charity, it's loving God as God. And we're often led to that by the promise of salvation. There's the idea of, and I've talked about this before, filial love and servile love. Servile love is saying, well, I'm going to follow God because essentially I don't want to go to hell, right? Because I want to go to heaven. And that's okay. And that's good. That can often be a very motivating thing. But then we get to filial love, and that's saying, no, I love God because he's God. Because I have come to know him. I have come to encounter Christ in the sacraments and in my prayer. And I just want to be with him because he's God. Certainly he offers the promise of salvation, but that's secondary. And think of how that's related to marriage in a lot of ways. Right? At first, when you're married and when you're dating, that person can offer you lots of good feelings, right? And there's kind of reciprocal, mutual love, right? And, well, at least mutual feelings. Then as time goes on, those feelings fade a little bit, right? If not a lot. And then it becomes, but then you become to enjoy the person for who they are, right? No longer are you hung up on in some ways, just the mere, puppy love, if you will. The puppy affection, the emotive affection. Now you come to love that person for who they are. You just want to be with them for who they are, and you accept them for who they are. And that takes a while to develop. I can still remember my parents, growing up. They had tough times. They had difficult times where they, fought and were angry, and us as kids, we were very, distressed about that. But they made it through, and looking at their relationship now, it's amazing how it's changed. And how, in many ways, they stop trying to change each other. Right? It's just like, well, that's your mom. Well, that's your dad. That's the way they are. And we love them for they love each other for who they are. Now they don't stop trying to grow holier and get better. That's the thing to remember. They always try to grow closer together as a couple, closer to the Lord. That's the important point to remember. So that's married love is a model for true charity. Is a way to depict true charity, the way that we are called to ultimately love God. So, then moving on, what is modern love? How do we misconstrue love in our day and age? How do we screw it up? Because when humans are given something, inevitably we'll always screw it up. That's just who we are. So, just a little brief video.
Like having your hands tied behind your back while driving and hoping everything works out. Like having an endless supply of the world's best chocolate chip cookies.
A weird feeling in your chest, like when you're about to go down the first drop on a roller coaster.
1,000 butterflies constantly fluttering in your stomach.
Like bursting into song in a musical, trying to express to the world that my heart is bursting at the seams.
Like when the oven goes off to let you know the pizza's done.
Smell of fresh, warm linen out of the dryer on a cold night as you get right out of the shower and slide in.
Like walking through a forest on a warm fall day. Everything is incredibly beautiful and you feel alive.
Like cookies to the Cookie Monster.
Like warm apple pie.
It feels like a magic carpet ride.
Insanity, with a fun twist of bliss and euphoria.
Like drowning in light, like standing on the edge of agony and bliss, like the sweetest slow poison.
Okay, so, yeah, nice. Now, yes, what does love feel like, okay? Which, yes, love does bring about emotions. If you don't have emotions about something, you don't love it, actually. So one of the things I always tell my couples is the opposite of love is not hatred, it's not caring, it's indifference. So if you don't care about someone, that's a dangerous thing. You can love someone and simultaneously hate them all in the same moment, or be angry with them, right? So love does bring about emotions, and it brings about good emotions and negative emotions. That's the point. So what is love truly? And the opening line was like driving a car with your hands behind your back. That just sounds awfully terrifying. I hope you have a little more control over love than that. But the point is that there's this idea that love just happens, right? Love just happens, as opposed to love is a choice at its root, at its basis. It can't ever be just merely a feeling. If it's just merely a feeling, we're in big trouble, because sometimes we don't feel like loving anybody, let alone our spouse or our children, right? We just don't feel like it, and we'd rather care more about ourselves than we do about loving. So it has to be rooted and grounded in that ultimate choice about another person. It has to be about the other person. And my difficulty, my criticism in some ways, again, they're nice sentiments about that, is in many ways it's all about, what it makes me feel like. What does love make me feel like? As opposed to, what does love allow me to offer? Or how does love stretch me, right? How does love pull me out of myself and make me a better person and bring me closer to God? So, I've used this before. This is supposed to be an equal sign. It must be something weird in formatting. So, ultimately, when we talk about truth in our society, choice, our free choice, plus our good feeling equals our truth, our love. Right? Because we say that in many ways the greatest thing we have is our love. Right? And pretty much, throughout human history, people would agree with that. I mean, is that love is one of the greatest things, our love for one another. We're constantly falling in love, entering into relationships with one another in marriage through love. So our truth, this is supposed to be a plus sign. I don't know what happened, that's supposed to be a plus sign. Our truth is ultimately our choice. Our love is ultimately our choice. Our love is about ourself. I talk with, again, going back to marriage prep, because I talk a lot about love. One of the things that I like to say to them is I say, you've probably been to weddings, and many of you probably have too, where the couple has written their own vows. And it is actually permissible to write your own vows. They just have to be, in a certain format, in a certain way. It's got to be very strict. I don't tell that to my couples just because it would be a big headache, and I know that sounds awful. I just say these are the options you have. But it is very permissible. It is very permissible. But often, it's a wedding outside on a beach, right? The couples write their own vows. And it's like, you complete me, or you're my best friend, and it's like, oh, that's very nice. But ultimately, when you think of it, when it comes down to it, it's all about me in a lot of ways. You complete me. What's the last, word in that sentence? It's about me. You make me a better person, which is actually a good thing. But in many ways, listen to those vows, and I feel natural when I'm with you. I feel normal when I'm with you, which is a good thing, absolutely. But it's all about how I feel around you, right? Whereas if you look at, the vows, I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, till death do us part, for the rest of our lives. There's nothing. The only part about I is I promise to be true to you. Right? So it starts, yes, it does start here, but I have pledged myself to you, no matter what happens. So it starts here and pulls me out, as opposed to starting here, oh, look at you, you're so nice, and you make me better. Or you're here, you're nice, and you complete me. Right? It's an opposite flip. It changes it around. So ultimately, we've created love to be all about ourselves, so that when I say to people, or when you say to people, or when any of us say to people, well, this is how we're called to live the moral life. Well, people say, well, I have a different idea, because that's not normative to my life. I have different experiences, right? You can't tell me what to do, because I have my own truth. I have my own way of loving. I have my own way of loving, and you can't tell me how to love. You can't tell me how to love, because there's an absence of charity, right? There's an absence of the love of God, which calls us out of ourselves. Okay, this comes from the movie The Graduate. Another depiction of modern love, if you will. And to set the context, I've never seen the full movie, in all honesty. I just know the context, and at some point, Dustin Hoffman's character, Ben, he has a relationship with the mother of Elaine, who he's dating at the time. I think they break. Correct me wrong if I'm wrong, anyone, if they've seen the movie. So this woman, this is Elaine. They're dating. He has a relationship with her mother, and then they break up, and she's about to get married to someone else.
Oh, Jesus, God, no.
Where's that guy? What's he doing? Take care of him. He's too late.
Now, unfortunately, it doesn't take it to the end, the complete end of that scene, where their faces just start to fall. Because the ultimate idea, it's not a glorification of that moment, even though it kind of ends happily because the love of their lives, they get together. But kind of the idea behind it all, as they're driving away, their faces kind of fall as the reality of what they've just done sinks in, right? How they've just run away and just completely left, everyone behind. The idea is that everything that, and again, I haven't seen the whole movie, but I've seen enough of it to understand that a lot of what Dustin Hoffman does is impulsive, right? He has an affair with Elaine's mother while Elaine and him are in a relationship, right? And so it's an impulsive move. Yes, Elaine's mother, and I don't know her name, does try and seduce him, but nonetheless, the choice to do that is still an impulsive choice, and a really dumb one, right? He's working at a mechanic shop, and he hears that Elaine's getting married, and he jumps in his car, and the guy there says, "Do you need gas? You need to fill up with gas." And he doesn't think, he just drives off. And before he gets to the church, he runs out of gas. And so he has to run the rest of the way. Again, another impulsive decision, right? Then he goes in, ruins the wedding, right? Another impulsive decision. And never really thinking it through. That's, in many ways, a characterization, even though it's a movie from 1967, of, free love. Of just saying, it's okay to go with what you feel like. Just go on your impulses. Follow your gut feeling, right? As opposed to understanding what true love is. You know, this is not true love, right? It's an impulse of two young kids, and the idea of the movie is as it pans away, they start to think of what the heck did they just do, and the gravity and seriousness of what they have done starts to sink in. So just kind of a depiction of what, in many ways, started to happen in the sexual revolution in the 60s and has continued on to our day, about just the impetuity of love. Is that even a word? I don't know. Impetuousness of love. One last depiction. I've used this before. Again, I should set the context. This is the Dead Poets Society. I've used this one clip before, but I couldn't find a better one. Dead Poets Society. So this young son goes off to a boarding school, and he's got a teacher, an English teacher. Can't think of it. Robin Williams, yes, Robin Williams, who sets him free and lets him know how good of an actor he is, okay? And he wants to follow his dreams of acting, and his father does not. His father wants him to become a doctor and become very successful. And so this is one of the ending scenes, is he is drawn out of the school and brought back home.
We're trying very hard to understand why it is that you insist on defying us. Whatever the reason, we're not going to let you ruin your life. Tomorrow I'm withdrawing you from Welton and enrolling you in Braden Military School. You're going to Harvard, and you're going to be a doctor.
But that's 10 more years. Father, that's a lifetime!
Oh, stop it! Don't be so dramatic and make it sound like a prison term. You don't understand, Neil. You have opportunities that I never even dreamt of, and I am not going to let you waste them.
I've got to tell you what I feel!
I've been so worried about... Tell me what you feel! What is it? Is it more of this acting business? Because you can forget that. What?
Nothing.
Nothing. Well, then let's go to bed.
That was good. That was really good.
Go on, get some sleep.
Okay, and then ultimately that evening he ends up shooting himself and committing suicide. Very tragic and sad. But what does he say? He stands up and says, "What about my feelings, right? Have you ever asked me what I feel?" And then his father says, "What do you feel?" Because if it's this, acting business, you can forget about it. You can stop those feelings. Interestingly enough, for his son, for Neil, his love is simply in his feelings. And so when that is taken away, there's nothing left to love anymore. His desires are gone. He says, I feel nothing. He says, what do you feel? He says, nothing. Once it's gone, there's no future. There's no more hope. There's no more life ahead, right? His love is gone. His love was based in his feelings, and once those are taken away, he has nothing else to live for. Now, on the contrary, his father has feelings, very strong feelings, about what he wants Neil to do, right? So neither of them are able to look at one another and truly love, right? Truly love, because they're both based in some sort of feeling of what I want to do or what I want for you, right? As opposed to what is truly good. So it's an emotional response on both ends. It's an emotional response on both sides, which doesn't lead to love, which leads ultimately, now, his father loves him dearly, and there's obviously great distress when he takes his own life. But Neil can't see that because his love has been pulled away. His love has been taken away because it's based in his emotions. And that, there we go, is our world. Take away what you truly emote, and there's no reason to live anymore, right? The case for assisted suicide, that's ultimately what it is, right? I have no purpose in life anymore. I don't feel good. I'm unhealthy. I can't better my state in life, my physical state, so why not just end my life, right? It was actually a moment when I changed my views, if you will, on God. I used to be very positive about what natural reason could accomplish with regard to trying to persuade people about morality and things like that. I was very positive about that. And then there was a debate in our school between two philosophy professors who I knew very well, both actually good Catholics. And one, his debate was ultimately that in order to have some type of morality, you need to have God. And his big example was this one of assisted suicide and suicide. And the only reason we can say that that's wrong, suicide is wrong, is if there's a God, ultimately, on a moral level, certainly on a feeling level, as far as, that's our son and we don't want to lose him and we love him, or that's our daughter and we don't want to lose him, or that's our father or our mother, there are those reasons as well. But on a moral reasoning level, the only reason that we could say that was because if we had a God, if we could understand what true love is, if we understood what charity is. And the other professor argued no, that you can have morality without God. Now, I think there's a balance somewhere in between, but it really flipped my understanding in that people have to come to realize God. They have to come to a conversion of heart. They have to come to understand love. And that's how you draw them in. We do worry in some ways, and I think what Pope Francis is trying to consider us to think about is drawing people in, and then trying to lead them to a more proper understanding of how the world works and of morality and things like that, as opposed to just saying, here's moral life, right? Now subscribe to it. It's more like, let's draw them in through beauty, right? Through one of the, this is Father Robert Barron point that he talks about, or now Bishop Barron, that he talks about. He says that the greatest way to evangelize is through beauty. And he uses Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited as an example. There's this young man who's in college at Oxford, right? And he becomes a good friend with a guy who's a Catholic, and he goes into this great mansion, Brideshead, and he's struck by the beauty of the place, and particularly the beauty of the chapel. And what that ultimately leads to his conversion, and what that ultimately leads him to realize is that what is the beauty behind this reality, that builds this reality, that makes this reality present? You know, the reason we have beautiful things for our Mass, you know, chalices, vestments, beautiful architecture, beautiful paintings in the church is because it's supposed to signify a greater reality, a greater beauty. And that's how we can draw people in. That's how we can hook them, not in a bad way, right? Not in a con artist's way, but that's how we can draw them in. So draw them in with our love, by the beauty of what we have professed to one another and to the world. The beauty of our service. True beauty is not, and we'll get to this, true beauty is not just physical, right? Something much deeper. So, what does modern love do then to Eros? It simply becomes sex or pleasure. That's all Eros becomes. So now, love, in some ways, is manifest, right? We even have the phrase making love, right? To sugarcoat sex, right? So kids can listen to songs and not understand exactly what it means, right? When it simply becomes sex, and this is from Dave's Caritas Est again, Benedict's first encyclical, Eros, reduced to pure sex, has become a commodity, a mere thing to be bought and sold, or rather,